go back into a four lows pattern. So
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
So I feel your pain because I was like, oh, I'm in four lows again. Oh no. But it's actually not as bad as you kind of like think it is.
Yeah. I- Well, thinking about how I was when I started, and I believe for you also, it was very difficult. But
Right.
after I thought about the program and found out that there is a solution to all this, and I'm doing better.
Yeah.
And I hope you are too.
Yes. Thank you.
I didn't really hear what just happened, but I'm just gonna do a disclaimer because I'm gonna start recording the call
Okay.
because no one made it really.
Okay.
So probably a lot of people end up listening in.
Sure.
Um, yeah, it's a mouthful, so just give me a minute. This audio is brought to you by John Bumpus, Nutritional Balancing Friends Facebook group. Please remember that none of the products, claims, or programs from this call have been evaluated by any government health body. The content and information found within this audio from John Bumpus, attendance of this group call, and in our affiliated Nutritional Balancing Friends Facebook group is for informational purposes only. The content is in no way intended as medical advice, as a substitute for medical counseling, or as treatment cure for any disease or health condition, and nor should it be construed as such because that would be illegal. Always work with a qualified health professional before making any changes to your diet, supplement use, prescription drug use, lifestyle, or exercise activities. Please understand that you assume all risks from the use, non-use, or misuse of this information. Thank you. Yeah, so we got to do that just to protect us as people.
Right. Yeah, that was quite a mouthful, man.
Yeah, try and get it out. I'm gonna memorize it one day. You'll see. I have to preface every comment I do on Facebook with that. I should, I guess. I don't know.
Right. I think one of the people in the group actually does. There is somebody in the group that gives
that's
advice, and they do a disclaimer before they give advice.
that's a Svetlana. I don't think that's her real name. But yeah, she does that almost every time she posts, which I
Right.
get a kick out of it. But I understand because I think she studies in the health field.
Right.
Um, So she doesn't want to lose any credential or anything that she's gained because that's what it's like nowadays, right? They'll take all your accomplishments away despite if you're in them just because you tried to help someone.
Right.
So, yeah. So the topic, everyone that's in this group is kind of new to the call. No one has joined one in the past. So I'm going to kind of outline what's been working for the kind of format that we've been doing. It's been working. We only had one call, but the last time we did was a 30-minute introduction, which we've just kind of gone through, and then we discussed last time that we're going to try and do Q&A, but there's not really much people here with questions. There was one lady that commented in the Facebook group, and I'll bring that question up in a bit because I kind of would like to hear Pippa's take on it. I didn't really prepare much for this call. I just kind of winged it, to be honest, but we'll see what happens. The structure of the calls are mostly just going to do some questions or something like that. I guess if Alex has any or Amy has any. And then kind of like the goal of the whole calls are not to be lectured and being told this is the way it's done or anything like that. Kind of like the calls to go more like a community kind of conversating about the topic at hand and different things that may have helped them or didn't help them or just different topics like that. I don't want to spend an hour and a half lecturing. I don't mind if Pippa wants to say something or I might say something, but just don't want it to be my time on the podium. I think the phrase is. So yeah. So the topic of this call was supposed to be on GI disturbances, which pretty much anything gut related. Do you guys have anything to say about that? Are you struggling with that yourself or?
Well, I have struggled with it at points, so I mean, it kind of comes and goes for me. So it's definitely not. I don't feel like I've got it all down pat. But I mean, I spent 3 years being being nauseous every day. So I feel like I'm a bit of an expert on the whole thing. But I actually ended up going to I did an organic acids test, which I do feel is really helpful for people who are dealing with GI symptoms. If you get it done through the Great Plains lab and not so much Genova, I found them not to be particularly helpful. But it showed up that I had something like a 60% of my bacteria in my gut were of the Clostridium species. So so I was, yeah, so I had like what you would probably classify as having a really bad case of SIBO that made me feel nauseous all the time.
Mm. Yeah,
Um,
C. diff is pretty, it's more common than you would imagine, right? But,
right. Well, I think, and also I think you think to yourself of C. diff that you'd be having like diarrhea and running to the toilet all the time, and I didn't. That wasn't what was going on for me. It was just mainly the nausea side of things. I just wanted to. I literally spent 24/7, 3 years wanting to vomit. So
oh no,
yeah,
that's not the best ever.
no, and
So,
to
did you get
stay
like
on.
stomach pains
And that,
or
no, not
just
even
nausea?
just nausea. Yeah, no stomach
Okay.
pain. I didn't even really have like loose stools or anything. I had a little bit of constipation that would kind of come and go, but mainly just the nausea side of things. And I had to kind of force myself to eat because I knew if I stopped eating, that it wasn't going to be a good road. So I had to just continue eating, and I didn't really. At that point, I don't think the whole gut microbiome stuff was really around so much, or there wasn't so much understanding of it. And I'd get breaks, like I might get a week where it'd clear up and I'd get my natural appetite back. But other than that, it was just like a full on onslaught of waking first thing in the morning when I'd wake up through till like when I'd go to bed at night.
Yeah, that's
So
no good. I think a lot of people nowadays, it's kind of like the double-edged sword where you get a lot of information about the microbiome and the different stuff that's going on with just the microbiome itself.
right.
But I think it's also like the double-edged sword where now that you're armed with that information, what do you do with it? And do I just nuke the microbe? Because that almost sounds like it's the better idea to do, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean,
So,
I think also a lot of people kind of take a lot of that out of context and they don't seem to treat the rest of the body. They just go, oh, well, if we just improve the microbiome health, then everything else will fall into place. And I don't think that's necessarily, well, at least my experience was that that wasn't the answer. I think I think that you can do that, but then you just keep getting you just have reoccurrences of the issue over and over again until you get to whatever the underlying cause is. And generally that's just to do with, cellular energy.
yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of different things. I mean, cellular energy is obviously a really big one. Any bacterial infection will start sapping out the nutrients for your human cells, right? So you kind of set yourself up when you stop eating, like you were saying before, because then what happens is your human cells start to die off because you don't have proper nourishment for your cells, and then you increase the likelihood for bacteria to replicate and multiply because there's more acid, there's more like endotoxins, right? Toxins that are produced inside of your body,
Right.
and they eat those up and basically poop, and that doesn't help you get better at all, right?
Mm.
So there's definitely a lot of people that when they do get a lot of stomach issues, they go down the fasting route or the stopping eating in general. And I definitely think that you're wise in the beginning, to be honest, because more often than not, I hear people, fast, like I was saying. And I think it makes it worse, personally.
Right. Well, I think it depends as well. I think you can do kind of like depending on your metabolic health, right? Because a lot of people go like down this, oh, I'm going to do intermittent fasting, and yet actually it's not the best for them because their metabolism can't handle it. So they
Yeah.
just give themselves more adrenal issues and things like that because their blood sugar's ping-ponging about all over the place. Staying fasting for 17 or 18 hours every day, and yet they try and force themselves to do that, and then wonder why they feel but I feel so good. Yeah, but that's because you're overproducing adrenaline and cortisol because your blood sugar's
That's it, totally. When I
you know
first
what I
met
mean?
Erin, that's what she was going through. Exactly
Right.
that.
Yeah, and it just it amazes me because there's so many people that do it, and they really, like there's that whole idea of like, oh, I feel so good, and so that means therefore, like, I'm having these, I feel really elated. So that's a sign that your blood sugar's about to drop. And like in about half an hour, you're going to be really hangry and moody, and then you'll carry on doing it. You'll keep going. so. So you got to be really careful of that trap of like, I feel really, but when I do this, I feel really good. Because, I used to do drugs and I used to feel really good, but it didn't mean it was good for me.
Right, absolutely. The other thing is when people are, well, I was in the Bulletproof group for a long time, right? I was the admin for the support group,
Right.
Aaron as well. And what we noticed most was because intermittent fasting was kind of the basis of what Bulletproof is all about. And we get a lot of people that either come in that are borderline eating disorder, right? Where they wouldn't like to eat, but then they would kind of go on the intermittent fasting, so I'm healthy and cool. Or there'd be people that basically just had like 7 coffees a day, 8 coffees a day, and they'd be like, I'm feeling great, but it's exactly what you're saying, where you're just kind of draining the adrenal gland, overproducing adrenaline, and basically, if they're not already, they're basically gone to a state where their cortisol has dropped so low, they're not even really producing any, and they're basically setting themselves up for an autonomic disorder. Right, because they're constantly stimulated all the time.
Right. Well, I was going to say that's pretty much how I got here. That's how I got to balancing, basically. So that's what I did. I mean, I didn't do, it wasn't bulletproof, but I did the whole raw food thing. And, back in that day, it was like green juices. So I'd spend all day fasting on green juice. Not, I would have no carbohydrates would be going into my mouth until I get around to the evening, and then I'd binge. And it was like an eating disorder.
Yeah, I was in the raw group too. We've talked about that in the past.
Yeah.
But yeah, those juices and juice fasts, yikes. You kind of wonder really, like, how sustainable. I mean, at the time I thought it was the best ever. Nowadays I kind of sit back and think, what was I thinking? Right?
Yeah.
But my judgment was clouded because I think I wasn't the healthiest. And I see that a lot where people are trying to help themselves especially, but their judgment is clouded because they're not in a healthy state. They're not thinking properly, right? It's like the drug addict. If you would, when they're trying to do something better, but then they cut themselves short almost every chance they get a step forward, right? They kind of take 2 steps back because they make that stupid decision. That's what I think. When I was in the Bulletproof group, we did a lot of fasting, and like I was saying, it mostly puts out the autonomic nervous system. And one of the things I've been trying to figure if it kind of interrelates with gut health really is when you're constantly stimulated, like when Alex was talking about in the intro, which isn't in the recording, you're kind of always in that sympathetic state, right? Where you're doing things, but you never, well, most people don't really actually get into the parasympathetic state, which is actually where digestion and recovery kind of take place. And down the road, you might be okay for like a couple days, a week, like moving. I'm probably screwed my hair test up, right? Pushing myself to get out and, a week, move to a new place. But if you're doing that all the time, your autonomic nervous system gets a little messed up. What happens when you're not properly digesting your food? Well, you need a bacteria to do it, right? because someone's going to have to do it. Otherwise, you're just going to fill up with food and it's going to putrefy and go all bad. So that's why you see like these old people, big guts, right? So what I've been thinking is a lot of times, and bulletproof is what got me into it, but you reminded me of it from like the, you know, the raw food and the juices and the fasting and all that from that thing as well, is where people kind of push that go button all the time, but they don't actually get the parasympathetic response in. And what I'm starting to think nowadays is the autonomic nervous system, which on the hair test is the calcium to phosphorus ratio, starts to get skewed, right? Calcium will start to go up and become biounavailable. And most slow oxidizers, one of the classic symptoms is slow gut motility. So they're not properly going to the washroom very well and things like that. Which, if you're not going poop, you're basically building up copper. And copper and candida are like kissing cousins. So you kind of start to build your way up to subclinical infections, or, you know, things where you might, on occasion, it's not so bad, but when you're drinking, or like from my experience in the bulletproof at least, when you're always on that go, you start to get to that point where you go, you'll probably hear Dave Asprey say it still to this day. I don't really listen to him, but I ate that and it was like kryptonite, you know? And it's almost like your body doesn't agree with something in its environment, therefore that food's the problem and not your biology or your metabolism, right? Like you brought up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where that whole idea nowadays that, you know, if you get ill, that you have to get off dairy and gluten and you're not allowed to eat any of those things. And I have so many clients that say to me, oh, I don't eat any of those things. And I say, well, do you have an issue with them? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, we'll just eat them then. They won't kill you. But I mean, I understand where the idea around it comes from, but there's like almost a fear of food that actually I think getting really restrictive on your food intake can be like, you know, it's kind of going back to that whole element of eating disorderish type behavior where people actually get terrified of the foods that they're eating. They just keep restricting and restricting and restricting.
Yeah, which kind of sets yourself up for, you know, digestive imbalances, right? Because like some people say, oh, I can't digest when I eat vegetables and I get gas, right? Which is, to some degree is normal, but too much, obviously there's a problem there. Some people say like, I ate a little bit of sugar or something,
Right.
and as if it's it was the sugar that really screwed them up. To me, I don't think that's healthy. I think that's a sign itself that there's something wrong with your health, because you might have seen at one point there's like the Guinness Book of Record, a guy, you know, a male, he eats like a whole airplane, iron and all the nuts and bolts and stuff, and that's a sign of proper digestive excretion of hydrochloric acid, because hydrochloric acid can digest those things. When you have like a little, you know, say it was bread, right, and that puts you out for a long time. It's, of course, with the exception of some people that are highly allergic or whatever, which still might be something else. I think it's a sign that, like, if you couldn't eat that small thing, like Christmas just passed, and if you couldn't eat some thing that maybe your grandma made you or something, to me, it's a sign of something being wrong. Because there's worse things in life than a little bit of sugar or a little bit of milk or a little bit of bread that you're probably going to get exposed to. And if that's all it takes, then it's hard to thrive, in my opinion.
Right. Well, I mean, it does give you a kind of insight into how sick the human race is right now, really. Because as a kid, I don't remember meeting anybody who had issues with like what they could or couldn't eat. You never went to like somebody's house and there was somebody there that said, oh, I can't have a piece of cake, sorry, because I'm, gluten intolerant or yada yada.
Mm-hmm.
It really, I do. It's like a real shock to see how much people's health issues have changed so much over like 47 years of being alive. But
yeah, well, I don't have that much experience with life, but show off.
But John, you're so wise. Look, I mean, you know.
Well, that's from all the trauma, I told you.
No, I know, but you know, that would make me wise as well. And I'm not as wise as you are. So.
Oh, I'm sure you are. But one of the things I have noticed is some people, like we had a guest the other day, like I don't eat gluten or anything like that, right? Aaron doesn't either. That's just a personal choice. We don't think it's really an ideal food. Not like we do have it on rare occasions, and really we probably enjoy it a little too much when those occasions come. It's like an alcoholic when he gets a beer or something. But we had a lady come and visit, and she did not eat any grains, and she was very adamant about that. Not even the blue corn that we eat in nutritional balancing. I'm not sure if you eat Pippa, but she wouldn't touch that. And she said, "Oh, my health has been so great since I did all that." You know, and she was talking and almost down talking the rest of the family that was here, as if the way that they're doing it is right and everyone else is wrong, right? It seemed like it was almost like a superiority kind of thing, which I thought was really weird.
Well, I think, yeah, no, you know, but I can see all of that in literally every single group that, you know, I've ever been a part of, like dietary group, whether it's been, you know, Ray Peat's teachings or raw food thing or paleo, is that we all believe that we were all doing the best diet on the planet and everybody else was totally clueless and didn't know what they were doing to their bodies.
Yeah.
There's a level of arrogance that comes with it and feeling like you belong to some kind of elite, you know, elite club. But entertaining.
Oh, what have we become? You know, like I just like to throw back a little bit. Like at one point we had like in human history diet, right? You would be eating pretty much any high caloric thing that tasted good. Even if it didn't taste good, you would still eat it if it made you feel good, right? Because you're like, oh, I'll eat that. And he's, you know, doing well, and don't eat that bush because it'll kill you. What I'm trying to get at is like we would eat all these different things, but there was no actual quote unquote diet, right? There was food, and you ate it to maintain what you're doing each day. So if you went and you just did a lot of labor, like lifting and moving stuff or whatever, you'd be eating a lot more stuff than if you weren't, right? Like you just wouldn't have the need to do it. And then the other aspect of like just touch on, because I think it would relate to gut health, maybe as the conversation goes forward, would be fermented foods, right? Like we couldn't store things in fridges where it would sit. Some people, I've heard clients that buy a whole bunch of green vegetables and throw it in the fridge and forget about it and throw it all in the garbage, right? We wouldn't have been able to do that in the past. Not necessarily like we were all paleo people, you know, or like our ancestors or something, but we would have had to ferment it. And fermentation has been very important throughout human history, right? Whether it be alcohol, the breads that we eat, yogurts, cheeses, even the alcoholic beverages, they've always been a part of human diet. So when people restrict so much to the point, like I know Dr. Wilson isn't very big on eating fermented stuff in general because it's Ian, he says, which I don't want to get into, but it's just, to me, it goes against that philosophy I brought up just now, where that was our natural storage, right? Like you wouldn't have a fridge, so it's in almost our ancestral metabolism, right? So it may not be your metabolism right now to eat that stuff, but it was part of the core of being human to do that, right?
Right. So let me ask you a question, John. You know, because we kind of touched on when you first started talking, you were talking about the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, and like us always being kind of switched into this state of kind of being in sympathetic nervous dominance, right? Even if you're a slow oxidizer, you still tend to be more sympathetic prone. I tend to find most people. So what is the way out of that?
You know, Pippa, Um, for me personally, if I used to think, I'll tell you, because I've been trying to chase this down for maybe about 6, 7 years, really. And I think personally, you can do the heart rate variability,
Right.
which the M wave, and that will tell you when your heart is in synchrony with itself, essentially. They say with your mind and all that, but basically your heart is in a rhythm, right? And that's controlled by your lungs, which is your breathing.
Right.
So I kind of think the yogis were right in that sense,
Yeah.
but I don't think it's all about breath because when I use my M wave, like I could probably plug myself in right now. It's just on the other side of the room. It's almost always green, like always. And I'll tell you, I'm stressing a lot of the time. Not right now or anything, but I've
Really?
had it on and I've been stressed and it's been green.
Interesting.
Because my heart is in a rhythm. But
Right.
was it an entrained rhythm that I've been in like that? Or is that the way that like is my nervous system actually balanced?
I always think that your nervous system is balanced, John, because you always sound so mellow when I talk to you.
Yeah, that's because serotonin deficiency. No, I'm just playing. To be honest, I've spent a lot of time trying to balance my nervous system because when I basically had the spinal injury, right, and I was always stressed out. I was always worried, always thinking about the future. It's so bad because I had a workplace injury that when I got a phone call, I had to run to the phone. I couldn't even run. I basically like pulled myself across the floor because I couldn't miss a call because God forbid I missed the phone call from the insurance company, right?
Mm.
So I was in like a stressed out state for a long time, like maybe 2, 3 years of constant stuff with allopathic medicine. So when I started doing like the heart rate variability and things like that, I found it helpful, right? And listening to calm music, like I tried hollow sync and all of this stuff that people advertise being really good for relaxation and all that.
Right.
And what I found is one of the most important things is your breathing rate and taking time each day to actually just not do anything, but just to be. And like I think Frank Sinatra says "doobie doobie doo," right? In one of his songs. I see that as like one of the mantras because it's you do things because you need to do things each day,
Right.
but then you got to take some time where you're not really doing anything. I think that's important. And obviously, the diaphragmatic breathing, when you belly breathe, like a baby innately does, I think that's one of the important things to help balance the autonomic nervous system. I mean, there's probably a million different things nowadays, but to me, those ones are really important. When I was really high calcium to phosphorus, which people say that's your autonomic nervous system ratio, a hair test. I think calcium being really elevated, they consider that as sympathetic. Um, Wilson calls it like parasympathetic, but in an unhealthy balance. So it's basically like you've been in sympathetic dominance for so long that your parasympathetic activates only because it needs to, by like through a necessity, but you're not actually in that state.
Right.
So I have found the hair test to be very helpful because the M wave gives me like a right now kind of thing, kind of like a blood test, but the hair test gives me the 3 month window. And I'll be honest, sometimes I get hair tests every 2 months.
Right.
But, I'm a little neurotic about it. But
Well, I
do you
think
have any tips for those listening? Or
no, I mean, I think that you're spot on when I mean, because my history is a history of trauma, so I'd say that I was like constantly stressed out for the first 56 years of my life, and it's only been the last year that I've actually really like done, I started doing trauma therapy, so that was basically my kind of entry point into it, which is all about, bringing the nervous system back down into balance and doing certain exercises, including, just being aware of my surroundings, which, I was always so caught up in my head that I wasn't particularly aware of the fact that I was safe. And that's pretty much what happens when you've been traumatized is you just constantly feel like you're unsafe all the time. I mean, I'm sure that an
Yeah.
accident that like you had also puts you into that PTSD type space of just feeling like you're constantly unsafe. I do various different things, like I do breathing exercises, and I do certain work with my eyes. There's something called the basic exercise by a guy called Stephen Porges, which is basically laying on your back with your hands interlocked underneath your head and just letting your eyes move very slowly from side to side without moving your head, and kind of resting them as far to the left or as far to the right as you can until you notice a relaxation response, and then you start to move back in the other direction. So it's done really slowly, but that can be really helpful. It's quite subtle, so you don't really notice much, but it really kind of like it builds your capacity, so it feels like what I've been doing is trying to work on building my capacity to handle stress more and more, and that's done through being able to relax, interestingly enough, so to allow whatever feelings and emotions come up. So I'd say that was, it sounds pretty similar, but it's interesting to think that like how many of us spend so many hours online or in front of a TV, or that whole doing things doesn't necessarily have to be just purely physical labor or engaging ourselves in work and things like that. I think it can be just that fact that we're constantly having that level of stimulation, whether it's television or sitting on Facebook as well. So I just wanted to mention that, because I think a lot of people think that they're sitting around not doing very much, but actually they're still keeping themselves in a state of like heightened awareness through their internet or TV addiction, and it's hard not to do anything. So really, honestly, I'm the champion of like distracting myself from actually just like sitting around and not really particularly doing very much. So
Yeah. Oh, when Aaron and I were on our honeymoon, I felt like the constant need to go do something. Right? We had nothing to do. Like, I just left my whole calendar free. Didn't have to do anything, but I was sitting back there and like relaxing on a beach, and all I could think of in my head, instead of enjoying, my life, was I gotta write a book. I gotta do all this stuff. Oh, I gotta go do this. I gotta go do that. And I would be thinking about it over and over again. And it took me a while to actually just sit back and be like, no, I can give myself, a week, 2 weeks to not do that, because that's all I do. And it was like their realization that I was addicted to doing things, right, all the time.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting, because if you think about it to some degree, if we were living a more of a natural lifestyle, right, in like nature, if we were more on the kind of hunter-gatherer, we would be probably doing things a lot of the time just purely because we would be like foraging and looking for food. It's not, I don't know if it's, we'll be looking after the kids or interacting on that social level, but those are things that we do that feed us. And then there's things that we do that don't necessarily feed us, if you get my drift. So
you mean like mentally and emotionally nourishing yourself through like family or playing a song or something, where it's not all about nourishing minerals and vitamins?
Right, yeah, totally. Yeah, like as in like I think that social interaction, being part of a group where we feel like we belong, would have been really important. Like our survival would have like depended on that. So we would have been engaging in, this kind of activity where we're being sociable around other people and being part of a group and like contributing to that group, so that we're a valued member of that group pretty much 24/7 to some degree. Doesn't mean that we would have been like out like looking for food 24/7 or anything like that, but that it would have been really important to our survival and to our sense of community. And I feel like we live such detached lives now that we don't really have that so much anymore. So it's kind of like we're just trying to fill the holes with like, I mean, like Facebook is not a substitute for having great relationships with people, but for some people it is, because that's all they have, because we don't live in these kind of like communities anymore. So I think, so what was I saying? So I think that it's natural for the mind to some degree to feel like it always has to be doing something on some level. But I think when you're filling your life up with doing things that aren't particularly natural to what actually makes the human spirit thrive is when it becomes more of an issue.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Like, just before I did this call, I barely made the call myself because, like I said, I was at the fire doing a fire pit. We have so many palm trees here. And I, of course, I don't want to say like, hunter-gatherer completely, but maybe like during the pioneer times when people had homes, and they could store food and things like that, they would still have to do things. Not all the time, but the more stagnant you are, the more you have to kind of maintain things, right? So here it got like, I had to do just a bunch of stuff because we didn't really have a fire pit, so I had to build the fire pit. And to me, like, I actually really enjoyed it. It was physically, like, it sucked. So, I was sweating, but which is okay to sweat, but I didn't do much. It was just really heavy to move it across. But at the end of it, I felt very satisfied just by, it was basically a rock circle, like the most basic fire pit you can make. But it just felt like it needed to be done, and I did it, and it was great. So it is weird. I was like, to me, that was nourishing because I needed to do it, right? It wasn't necessarily about lifting it and trying to get exercise and all that. I mentalized it after, right? Oh, I did some paleo workouts or whatever, rewilding. Yeah, but I do think that we're accustomed to doing a lot of stuff. What's interesting to me, and it kind of always is a lot of ancient cultures always have really brilliant art, like whether it be music or paintings. There could be other stuff too, right? Landscaping and all that stuff, but architecture and stuff. But it always interested me on like how human also did things through art, right? I thought that was really cool. And I think it has something to do with, like in Taoism, they talk about the stomach as if, well, at least from what I learned from Marguerite de Serigny, who was a French, Tibetan, acupuncturist and all that from Canada, us Canadians. But she used to say that the stomach is the source of desire. And whether you're desiring food to nourish yourself, or you're desiring to change something in your environment, or desiring to make something, pretty, beautiful, or something, that was the sign of the stomach and the power of the stomach. And if you had something that was, didn't really have the desire to do much day to day or something like that, they would say that would be a weak stomach meridian. And I always thought that was really interesting too.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of those things can be used as an adjunct to nutritional balancing. John, what's your advice to people that have like digestive issues who are doing a nutritional balancing program? Like, do you feel like just doing a nutritional balancing program on its own is enough to like, obviously if somebody's like doing a little bit of meditation here and there, is that enough to pull somebody out of like being stuck in their sympathetic nervous system, or is it, do they need to be doing extra stuff in order to kind of like get their digestion back up and running? Do you think taking minerals is enough?
All you need is your mineral. No. I do think minerals are very important. I think nutritional balancing as a program, whether you're doing the TEI approach, whether you're doing the ARL thing or you're doing Wilson, whatever your path is that you've chosen to take, I think that it's important to always consider doing stuff a little outside of the lines, because as I was saying before, where there's no perfect diet, despite Wilson and his helpers or whatever, his diet's not perfect. There's a lot of people just in the nutritional balancing group that we have that often talk about their gut issues, right? I think just yesterday there was a guy commenting about the inability to digest protein, which I don't think, he's been on the program for a while. I don't know all of his, basic stuff, but I don't think that the program itself is kind of a one-size-fits-all for everyone. I do think it's important to work on removing a lot of foods that are inflammatory to you, right? Which could be different for everyone. Like me personally, I can't eat pomegranate. That's my body hates it. I like it, right? I love the taste and all that. I nerd out about the antioxidants or whatever, but it makes me projectile vomit. Like that's
Wow.
it's
Really?
yeah, like it's
That strong a reaction to it?
yeah, like I drink it, or even if I eat it, and I'll be fine, and then I start feeling dizzy, and then I just puke it everywhere. And I've had it a couple of times, and to know that I just don't do it now. And I think that's a very irritating food for me, right? Which is not part of the nutritional balancing thing anyway that Wilson does, but it's just one of those foods, right? And I think some people may have some challenges with different foods. Like I know when I first started doing carrot juice, they used to irritate my throat, things like that. And I think anything that is either irritating to your body or inflammatory to your body is a good step one to kind of take a step back and not necessarily incorporate it right away. And then obviously you need to replace them with something, because if you just starve, you're not going to really fix your gut, right? I do think it's important to start working on your metabolic health, because the slow oxidizer obviously has the high calcium, usually, not all the time. They can just have borderline, normal, ideal calcium levels. On the metabolic level, it doesn't really matter if it's in the normal range or if it's, a calcium shell or something, like 150 or something like that. It doesn't really matter, because if it's out of balance with magnesium and potassium, sodium as well, but magnesium and potassium are two different ratios, right? Calcium to magnesium, calcium to potassium. If they're out of balance, then your calcium is high. It doesn't matter how high the calcium is itself, right? I think that balancing the minerals are very important on the metabolic level. Most people that have digestive issues do have an inability to either, some people can't take fats in, some people can't take proteins in. And I think a lot of the time that kind of makes you susceptible to different nutritional deficiencies, which may or may not be addressable through just a basic Wilson program. For example, if you have like low hydrochloric acid, you're not really going to be able to break down proteins properly into amino acids, but you're also not going to be able to properly utilize vitamin B12. So oftentimes a lot of people get deficiency of vitamin B12, and I think TI doesn't even have B12 in their supplements. So if you're on that program, you're pretty much, you don't want to add something. But if you're with Wilson, B vitamins are considered somewhat toxic, and you don't want to take too much of B12 because of the cobalt. So you kind of get yourself in like weird little things, I guess you could say. Like you don't want to step out too far, but when you're just sticking to any one protocol, you're kind of bound to have some issues.
Right. All right. So say, for example, somebody's got a protein deficiency. Can you not just throw a shit ton of like hydrochloric acid supplements at them and hope for the best?
Personally, I don't think that's a good idea. You might have a different opinion, but from what I know is different digestive enzymes can actually break down biofilms. And if you have like a bacterial infection or something like that, or even just a biofilm that's made up of stuff that's probably less than beneficial for you, the digestive enzymes can actually break down the biofilm, and what happens is it releases toxins into the body, which isn't always like the best idea ever. Of course there's like a balance for everything, right? Like digestive enzymes are super helpful, and the amount of times I've seen them help people are great. I mean, I've seen people hurt themselves with digestive enzymes, not necessarily completely from orally, like obvious hurting themselves, but if you've ever got one stuck in your throat, I've had a client that like afraid to take them anymore because it burned her throat, like literally. She had like She went to the doctor and everything over it. So I do think there's a place for them. Personally, I like to work with, it sounds a little odd, but I like to take in more sea salt firstly and work on my potassium intake, even if you're protein deficient, because if you're not going to be able to digest things like, steak or whatever it be, sausage or, I don't know, choose your meat, right? I wouldn't just like try and eat them and take digestive enzymes at the same time. It might fix it in the short run, but I don't think it's a long-term sustainable thing where you're always eating digestive enzymes. I think your body should be able to produce those itself.
Right.
I know pancreatin, which is produced by the pancreas, right? I think it's calcium dependent, actually. You could fact check me, but I'm quite sure that is right. That's really important for digesting protein. And if you're a slow oxidizer, again, with a high calcium level, you're most likely, like, high calcium to magnesium is like a pancreas thing because it's your blood sugar, right? So you're probably not going to be able to properly produce pancreatin. So I wouldn't take like a broad spectrum to begin with. I'd kind of just work with pancreatin first, right? Especially if you're a slow oxidizer.
Right.
I know the fast oxidizers have a little bit different of stuff going on. What do you think?
I think you're quite spot on that side of things. I mean, I think that taking hydrochloric acid and things like that can be helpful because otherwise you can get caught up in that kind of vicious cycle of like, okay, you can't break any foods down, so then you just you don't eat them, and so then you don't eat them and then you become more deficient in something. So I think that they can be used in a way to like help somebody to break out of being in a vicious cycle, but I don't think they're ultimately the answer at the end of the day. Although I had one girl who I know who's a nutritional balancing practitioner herself, and I suggested that she takes some really high dose hydrochloric acid because she was dealing with diarrhea. And I know that it did help to clear her diarrhea up. And I think after that, she ended up doing some other stuff that kind of like kept that in place. But it was kind of like, one of those steps in the direction of clearing up her chronic diarrhea or issue, which she was having, because that can be caused by not having enough hydrochloric acid in the gut as well. So I think that I agree they're a band-aid. You don't necessarily I don't want to be taking hydrochloric acid for the rest of my life, but I think that they can be beneficial short term to get somebody's kind of gut to some degree and moving in the right direction, and at least like knowing that they're actually absorbing some of the nutrients that they're putting into their body.
Yeah, totally. That's what I feel. I mean, someone might counter that with some really great points, but I just don't think it's natural. I know as you get older, you might want to consider them because a lot of people, I don't know how scientific fact it is, but a lot of people say that your digestive enzyme production decreases as you get older. So
Once you
not
hit
just
40.
Yeah, you probably have heard that. It could be a health myth for all I know. It's been around forever, right?
Yeah, I think there's some validity to it. I think, I don't know if it's that I think what happens is your metabolic energy starts to decline, and so therefore that's that knock-on effect is that
I agree with that. Absolutely.
but yeah, 40 is that point where, everybody says to you, like when you get to 40, oh, your eyes are going to go downhill now. You're like, yeah, I've got nothing wrong with my eyesight. And at 42, you're like, okay, where's my glasses? It happened,
Yeah.
So, but kind of going back to this idea. So you were talking about balancing things out using, like the sodium to potassium ratio as well.
Sodium potassium ratio. Well, I know it's very esteemed and a lot, Eck and all that really like it. I'm kind of on the edge of that one because I find it's a good vitality indicator, but if you're going to try and use it for digestion, I don't know how accurate it would be. Calcium to potassium could be pretty good because that's a thyroid indicator, right? And that well, it's not just the thyroid, but the thyroid and the gut have an important relationship together. Well, I talked about the autonomic nervous system in the beginning of the call. What happens is if you're being constantly stimulated and things like that, and you're not digesting your foods properly, well, what happens is bacteria have to clean it up. Like that's just nature's recycling workers. That's what they do. Whether it's in the forest or in your body, they clean up. So you can have, bacteria infections when you're healing or when you're getting sick. They're both important. When you're not digesting your food properly, your food starts to putrefy, go bad in your body because you might either have slow peristalsis or your food's just not moving very quickly throughout your body. What happens is the liver has to clean out any toxins that end up in the blood, right? So when bacteria die, or when your cells themselves start to die off, the liver's got to clear that out. When it's just the liver's job. When you have a high inflammatory diet or foods that are inflaming your body and you have bacterial infections, what happens is, the thyroid's part of the immune system. I don't really believe in the immune system, but it's part of the immune response, right?
Right.
And what happens is it can affect your thyroid. So what I'm just thinking is the calcium, potassium. Calcium alone is very important for the pancreatin release. Potassium is very important for hydrochloric acid production. So I was thinking both of them together are kind of a good indicator for digestive stuff, because a lot of people with thyroid issues or even Hashimoto's, I don't know, like it could be different if it's very high or very low. The point being is that, because I have clients on both sides of the scale, the point being is that the calcium potassium being out of balance themselves is kind of like a digestive kind of indicator. And by balancing, whether it be calcium, if it needs to go higher or lower, and potassium, higher or lower, I think can do a lot more for your gut than what most people would lead you on to believe.
Okay, so then here's one of the questions. So a lot of people, especially the slow oxidizer people, know that it's really hard to get your potassium up. So how do you
Yeah.
go about doing that?
Well, you're going to put me on the spot here. Didn't know we were going to talk about that. Well, first off, very low potassium, lower than 4, is a sympathetic dominance indicator. So first off is you could be genuinely always activating that nervous system, right? Like that could be number one. If you've been doing well on that, you've been relaxing and taking 20-minute breathers after each meal and practicing your long exhales as if you're playing a wind instrument. Another Steve Porges tip, which you mentioned something else he did. And I do recommend anyone, if they do listen to that, to check out Stephen Porges' work, because that's really helpful for the nervous system.
It's called the polyvagal theory. I think that's the name of his book, isn't it? The polyvagal theory.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
He's got a couple out. He's got like the layman's version and like the science people's one.
The Boffins version.
Sorry?
Beginner's version and the Boffins version.
Yeah. So, yeah, the potassium, like, it's really difficult to bring that one up. And I don't think it's always correlated with your potassium intake.
Right.
Some people, hair analysis practitioners might think I'm a little wrong there, but if they think about it and maybe they consider their own experiences and stuff, they might find what I'm saying is a little valid. But you can eat a lot of potassium. You could be doing nettles. You could be doing, coconut water and cherry juice, all this different stuff that's high in potassium. Eating your fruits. So you're getting the 4,500 milligrams each day, and your potassium is still low. I wouldn't always think that it has to do with a deficiency of potassium intake. I would look more at the nervous system, and I would consider if the thyroid itself is in a good state.
Right.
I know lithium is very important for bringing potassium levels up, and it doesn't do that directly. It like raises sodium, and sodium pushes potassium up, so it might not be good for everyone. But
Right, but the thing with lithium is that lithium can slow your thyroid down if you have an already slow thyroid.
yeah, so that's what I mean. Like, it's not going to be good for everyone. Potassium one itself, if I could pass it over to you, it's very hard. It's like Alex in the beginning was saying, he's in 4 lows. And I just wanted to say that the hair test, while it may be valid for the tissue mineral status, I think that the four lows is special, especially the very low minerals. I think sometimes they can be special indicators that aren't necessarily relevant to your tissue level across the board in every part of your body. And I think that clients who's like with a very low magnesium level that they can't get up, doesn't matter how much magnesium they take, how much of anything else, it's just a challenge for them. So I don't always think it's 100% dietary deficiency, right? What do you think, Pippa? Do you have any tips for raising that potassium level?
Well, as somebody who's eaten like 7,000 milligrams of potassium a day and still had low potassium at points, I don't actually eat that much potassium now, but you know, I've definitely gone through moment when I was into my whole repeat thing. I kind of got into eating a ton of potassium, and it, you know, it definitely makes me feel better, but it didn't move my potassium on my hair test at all. So it still
It's
stayed.
interesting.
Yeah, it still stayed at a 1, you know, and then I'll meet people and I do hair tests on them and they eat junk food and barely eat any potassium, yet their potassium level will be like a 6 or something like that. And I'm like, bastard, how do you do that? So, but for the most part, I think you're spot on when you're talking about the nervous system, because you know, I would definitely agree that there's I think if you're constantly stimulated to being in that sympathetic mode, with a dysregulated nervous system, that your body is on all the time. I think that you're burning through minerals really quickly. And you may be just sitting and watching the television, but you're unconsciously you're in flight mode. You know, you might not be aware of it, but you're on hyper alert. So I think that does, like, you know, I think that uses up a lot of cellular energy. I think it burns through a lot of minerals. So I think that's pretty spot on your idea about the whole idea of like it being a sign of being in sympathetic dominance. Yes, I agree with you. Do I have any ideas about how to bring it up? No, but I'll let you know when I can work it out.
All the listeners are going to be like, oh man, we're screwed.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No, but the thing is, you know, I mean, it's really interesting because people in hair analysis, they have so many different ideas about these things, and like there's practitioners out there that don't even take like the sodium and potassium levels into account. They think that they don't mean anything.
Yeah.
So just literally working on all the other levels in a hair test, but they don't think that the sodium potassium is particularly important at all.
Let me ask you a question. I don't really have an expectation for an answer. I don't expect one to be right or wrong or anything, but what do you think is more important, the autonomic health, the state of your autonomic nervous system, or your metabolic health? You know, do you think they interact with each other and influence each other? Or
Yeah, I think that they interact and they influence each other. I think, yeah, so I don't think you can have good metabolic health if your autonomic nervous system is out of balance, and vice versa. So I don't think you could really differentiate. Although, in saying that, I have seen people that go on thyroid hormone who've had horrific adrenaline rushes and things like that, and then they start taking thyroid hormone and their adrenaline will, you know, shift. But sometimes having really low cellular energy can overstimulate you into being, I think, sympathetic dominant. And it seems like it seems like it wouldn't necessarily make sense, but I think a lot of people, what they don't realize is that you need to have energy to sleep, which is one of the reasons why when you get sick, quite often one of the things that happens is your sleep will get disturbed.
That's interesting. I never really considered that piece. Sleep requiring a lot of energy.
Yeah. So, you know, I would say at my worst, right, I was fatigued. That's where that kind of whole wired but tired thing comes from, because you're exhausted, but yet you can't relax because your nervous system is overstimulated because you don't have the necessary minerals and the cellular energy to relax. Relaxation is something that people do who have high energy. So if you look at people who are high energy, you know, not people that are kind of neurotically have high energy, because there's a lot of people like that out there. And it's really interesting when I talk to other health practitioners, like when I meet somebody and they're talking like 10 to the like that, I don't think that that's a healthy person, even if they can go and run like 3 marathons in a day. That isn't a sign of health to me. That looks like a sign of like imbalance now.
Those CrossFit people, though, they look healthy.
Yeah, but that looks deceiving.
Yeah, and feelings are deceiving. I don't know what to believe. But I'm gonna have to believe my mind.
Right, but
So,
my perception of it is like I always feel like the healthy people are people that can jump up and go and do something, but that they can also relax when the time is needed and not be still in that overstimulated mode. So at least that's what I feel like I'm learning a lot, what I've learned a lot through like Ray Peat's work and doing a lot of this kind of work around relaxing the nervous system, that actually once you become more organized in your nervous system, which is quite a concept within itself, that you're able to shift between sympathetic and parasympathetic quite easily whenever when the need calls. You don't get stuck in one or the other.
I agree, like, absolutely. I think that's why the arts and dance and things like that came about, to be honest, is that people were just genuinely healthy and they've done the things they needed to do and they had an abundance of energy to not do anything.
Right. Yeah.
Now it's a luxury to do those things, right?
Right. Right. Well, I mean, I think lots of people are just caught up in like just trying to keep their head above water and survive for the most part these days, especially
Yeah.
in the times of Trump and Brexit.
Oh, your post has been stressing me. What are you doing, Pip? Come on Facebook to relax.
I like to talk about political stuff on Facebook. It's the only option I get to talk about political stuff.
Far too physical in real life, huh?
Well, I just don't have anybody around me. I don't, I live in a predominantly kind of like conservative based area. It's not people not, they're not particularly interested in politics around here. So I don't get to really express it very much with people. So yeah, so that's my outlet is on Facebook.
Yeah,
I
it's
get
okay.
to I get to like grind my axe at the world on Facebook, talk about injustice. Where, I don't want to like I'd lose all my friends if I talked about it. If I talked about it to them.
You have an abundance of Facebook friends. So we got like 20 minutes left just to kind of chit chat. There
Wondering if
was a
Alex had
question.
any questions actually. Yeah.
Yeah, Alex, you here? He might be like, doing the dishes or something.
Okay.
I'm just guessing. I have no idea what he's doing. But there was a question in the group. I'll ask it to you first because I have to read it so you can answer.
Thanks.
Yeah, I pass. No, I got some opinions. Not on all of it, but at the end of the day, anyone needs to remember that it's always pretty much an opinion, and we share our experiences, but they're not always perfect. They're not always right. They're not wrong either. It's just that's the conundrum of being human. So Galka asked Dr. Wilson's opinion that the following supplements are harmful to NB programs: L-glutamine, which is essential for gut repair, and anti-inflammatory, such as curcumin, boswellia, EGCG, which I think that's green tea extract, and quercetin. I always feel awkward pronouncing that one. Quercetin is an antioxidant in apples, I think. It's a polyphenol, I think.
Yeah.
L-lysine, which is an anti-inflammatory, antiviral thing. He does recommend lysine actually for 4 lows. I'll just put that out there. Do you have anything to say about those?
Why well the only thing I can think of, like, I don't know why he says that they're bad for people, but I mean, like, so with what was the first one? Glutamate.
L-glutamine, that stuff that people buy for gut
Right.
health
So some
powder.
people are sensitive to glutamate. So some people can have a reaction to that. mainly if you've got histamine issues on the first one. So, and then on the things like curcumin, well, the main thing that flags up in my head around curcumin is the fact that it can lower your iron status. And things like milk thistle can do the same. So it's just something to be aware of if you're doing a nutritional balancing program. You start taking things like that you can lower other mineral levels from taking them. So they're not always, so they can be great for some people, and for other people, they can be the worst thing you could possibly wish for.
Just on that note, I wanted to point out that licorice is also one that can lower potassium, and a lot of people try and take licorice to help their gut health. So something to keep in mind.
Yeah. And then what was the last one? I don't know why lysine. Yeah, I don't know why he would say. Well, you said he already says it's okay for 4 lows people.
Yeah, I just read her question, but she does recommend it for 4 lows. It's not part of the standard thing, but it is one of the things for 4 lows.
Yeah, that must be a new thing, because I don't remember him talking about that when I was doing his program, but that was about 5 or 6 years ago now. So
I just remember it. That's all I know. It's probably in the book. I have it behind me, but yeah, because I never did it myself. Lysine, I do know it can be helpful for people that have breakouts on their face, herpes simplex.
Yeah, it's good for herpes. Yeah.
Yeah, I never had to take it for any reason like that. I do know that taking any free-form amino acid, L-lysine or L-glutamine, they utilize other amino acids, and your amino acids, to make a protein, you basically need a mineral to hold the 2 amino acids together, which makes like a 3-dimensional protein, which you need to be 3-dimensional. Otherwise, you're like a cartoon or something. It just doesn't work. So you need to have a mineral. So lysine and L-glutamine probably deplete things that Wilson doesn't want to be depleted. I'm not aware of exactly what his beef is with them. I have found curcumin, not necessarily the extract. I think, well, in herbology we talk about curcumin being the extract of turmeric, right? So I don't know if she's talking about one or the other, because I know in other languages they just call it curcumin.
Right.
But I have found it to be pretty helpful for gut health.
Yeah.
It does promote the bifidobacteria species.
Right.
And it's also a very subtle liver cleanser, which is probably why it depletes some iron, because of the cytochrome P proteins. There's so many of them. Probably does something there. Boswellia, I haven't used it too much, I'll be honest. That's an Ayurvedic herb, I think. EGCG, I can't really comment, to be honest. I think if you're already on a foundational program for minerals and vitamins, I think EGCG and quercetin can both be beneficial additions. I think quercetin helps cut back things like candida and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's also good for histamine reactions as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a personal problem with either one of those, to be honest.
Yeah, I use quercetin.
Yeah, I think I remember in some of Dr. X stuff, I think he used it to help lower calcium.
Right.
Could be wrong, but I think that was in his work. That's why we sell it at ARL.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I've ever noticed it being sold at ARL quercetin. What's it? Is it just sold as a standalone formula?
I think it comes with barkberry, and I think there's another one. I forget their names. It's been a while since I looked at it because it's not one of the standard ones. But there's another one with that pine bark extract in it, and I think it's got quercetin. I think it's got grape seed extract and grape skin extract. Probably has EGCG in it as well. It's just like it's called Proanthro formula, actually, because proanthocyanins is basically what it is. I've never actually used it myself, so I don't know, to be honest. I just know I could get it. It's just really expensive, really. I never really thought it was necessary. I don't like taking a lot of those extracts because I don't think they're very bioavailable. You take them and don't really do too much, kind of thing. Her second question was Dr. Wilson's suggestion to address gastrointestinal issues with low FODMAP diet over 6 months period.
Ooh, no, I wouldn't do that.
Low FODMAP.
But yeah, I wouldn't go low FODMAPs for 6 months. I think the most you want to do low FODMAPs for is like maximum 3 months. You're just going to
Yeah.
have those like good bacteria that start to die off, and you can't resurrect them. So,
I agree with that because that's like the fructose, oligosaccharide. Those are all sugars, right? And you do need long chain sugars for bacteria. That's their food. So, sorry,
yeah, so
continue.
yeah, I think doing long-term low FODMAPs is not a good idea. I think maybe doing like 2 or 3 months just to kind of get the bacteria kind of like under control, and then starting to expand your diet again whilst you're putting in good bacteria as an option. But 6 months I wouldn't do.
Yeah, I know Erin's been on the low FODMAP diet, and not long after we met, I'd got her off of it only because I found it very restrictive of a lot of things that someone with adrenal fatigue probably shouldn't be avoiding.
Right.
Because I do find, especially when you have like adrenal burnout, even advanced adrenal burnout, when you're like having a hard time getting through each day and you're basically in bed, you might need some sugars just because it's some energy your body can actually utilize without going into more of a deficit. That's kind of the reason why athletes, eat carb bars and not like, low sugar diets
Right.
because
Yeah.
they need it.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think I don't know if you ever saw Chris Masterjohn's takedown. Like, so basically, I guess there's a football team in the US, and they decided to go on a low carb diet, or ketogenic diet. I don't remember if it was ketogenic or a low carb
No.
diet, one of the
Yeah,
two.
okay.
And as you could imagine, their their ranking in the league dropped quite significantly over a period of time.
Yeah, unless they're winning games like in the first round or whatever. I don't know, football, I don't even know how that works. I think you have to play the whole game no matter how far ahead you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But that's another thing just on the sugar note. I know it's not really NB friendly or anything, but there's a process the liver does called gluconeogenesis, which is where it creates sugar from proteins, or even storing glycogen in the liver. So you can have stored sugars in the liver. You need to have stored sugars in the liver to properly detox. Like
Right.
that's just the end of it. So if you're either gonna have to eat an abundance of protein and to try and convert that into sugar, or just bite the bullet and have something that's a little bit sweet. It'll actually enhance your detoxifying capacity. That's my own bit. I don't think that going complete strict sugar free is important. I
Right.
think you need it.
Yeah.
Um,
I agree.
I have seen people, that follow the body ecology diet, which I did for a bit, where you go pretty much very low sugar, fermented foods, and things like that. But I didn't notice many people getting better, and to be honest, it didn't help me. What helped me most was detoxifying copper, to be honest.
Right. Yeah.
She's got one more question, unless you want to add more to that.
No, I agree with everything you said there. I'm like, the worst thing I ever did for my health, the thing that tanked my health the most, I would say, was going low carb. So I don't suggest that to any of my clients. I think it's about having balance. I don't think you can keep your blood sugar regulated well when you go low carb, and having to go into like gluconeogenesis is like a secondary backup plan when you don't have any carbohydrates around. So why would you put your body under that stress when you have access to carbohydrate?
Yeah, and it's also a stressor just to convert protein into sugar it's nowadays it's so readily available. It's almost like why add another stressor. Yeah, that's how I feel, and especially those long chain sugars. I think the future will not necessarily, like, probiotics are beneficial, but those prebiotics, having proper prebiotics in your diet, which mostly come from root vegetables. I remember I read an article one time, sweet potato, it genetically engineered itself with a bacteria, like it's like thousands of years ago or something. So I think just by nature utilizing bacteria with those root vegetables, to me that's a good sign that I probably need them. And the other aspect is we also talk about ketogenesis as if, the Paleolithic time period, they were only eating fat and meat and things like that, like the standard paleo diet, which is not very accurate actually, because if you consider any ancient civilization, they've always included a carb of some kind, whether it be corn or rice or potato, right? Root vegetables have been around for a very long time. So all of those things, they are higher in carb, higher in starch, but I think they're necessary.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you there.
And the keto diet, that's a starvation diet.
Yeah.
Like that's what it is. It's a starvation diet. And if you're ever going to try and activate your nervous system in the sympathetic state, go ketogenic, right? You'll burn out your adrenal glands and start building up that copper like nothing. There's a fourth question this lady asked, Gelka asked, was, is it wise to suggest large portion size of vegetables to patients/clients with GI dysfunction?
Not if you can't digest them, I'd say. Not if you haven't. If they're causing you a lot of like feedback, then I'd say no. I'd say start small and slowly build up. I think sometimes people kind of jump into things. They go, "Oh my God, I've got to be eating 9 cups of vegetables a day," and they've gone from like one. And I think that can actually, I think that can cause a lot of problems in the system. So I think it's better to kind of cut your vegetable intake down and slowly build it back up again and find vegetables that you can tolerate. That's my take
I
on it.
agree with that.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a better idea to go small and consistent rather than just going hardcore, a cup, like 10 cups of vegetables, like Dr. Wilson would recommend?
Yeah, I think that people that, yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's fine if you can digest that kind of amount of vegetables straight off the bat. But I think if you can't, that it's better to kind of like just, look at other avenues. Just, I mean, when I had really bad SIBO, I couldn't eat more than like even a 1 cup of vegetables probably a day because my gas was so bad. I'd just be like doubled over in pain all the time. So it never
Mm.
much fun. I mean, I remember one time I ate a cup of beans after not eating any beans for a long period of time. And I literally was on the floor, like doubled over, holding my stomach because I had so much gas. I actually thought I was going to have a heart attack. So,
Oh, bless.
yeah, so I would say start slowly and slowly build your way up. If you can't tolerate that much, then other options.
I totally agree. The other thing I'd kind of consider is that if you're trying to add some vegetables in, even if you have a hard time digesting them, whether it's a mouthful, if that's all you can take, because some people, I think Ziska, for example, is pretty much off of vegetables completely. And I know that Phil has caught all of his stuff against anti-vegetables, but I do think that they're absolutely necessary for the gut microbiome to be in a healthy balance. And I think if you can't digest them properly, they even consider blending them and then fermenting them and then just having a small amount as a side kind of thing. I think it'll take you a lot further than if you were to just go without vegetable, because where there's a lot of propaganda on carnivore diet right now, and personally I don't think that's very sustainable, not only for the earth, but if you've ever worked with anyone, or if anyone ever knew anybody that lived primarily on meat, they often get gout. Like, that's the way the cookie crumbles with that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can
So,
say I can say putting my hand up in the air and saying I've tried it all. That all meat diet didn't work for me.
yeah,
And it gets really
I'd like
more.
to think. I like to think that as humans, we're not just organisms. We're super organisms in the sense that we're made up of other organisms, like bacteria. We're made up of viruses, and fungus, and all these other microorganisms, right? So we're actually giants, which is pretty trippy to think about. And we get along as a healthy individual when all of the flora that lives within us is healthy. And we should look at our inner bodies just like we look at our outer bodies, where a good forest is made up of diversity and not just one certain plant or one certain strain of bacteria in our gut. So I've always kind of lent towards the more vegetable intake, primarily because there's been research showing that they have more diverse gut microbiomes. And to me, I think diversity is very important. So there's my hippie stance.
I'm down with your hippie stance, John.
Yeah. Well, we're pretty much done the call. I'd like to thank Pippa for chit-chatting with me.
Thanks for inviting me, John.
Yeah, too bad. I thought for sure more people were going to show up. Oh, look at this. 2 people joined right at the end.
Right. Hello, you're too late.
Oh, we're done. Bye-bye. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for everybody for coming.